Hey YouTube, it's Dimitri, and today we're going to talk about personal finances from quant finance perspective. Somebody asked me, so recently I posted, I paid off $160,000 between my wife and I in debt from graduate school. So we paid it off in, I don't know, 5, 6 years, something like that. So definitely ahead of schedule for the 10-year program. But today we're just going to dive in and talk a lot about education. Should you take on debt? How do you pay off debt? And different strategies. So let's just dive on in. Okay, so the first thing here to think about is your degree. So I think a lot of people go out and think, what do I want to do for a career? What do I want to do for a living? And that's good to think about. But at the same time, they don't think about it from a finance perspective, which is, I'm investing in myself. Is this a good investment? Okay, so what do I mean by this? So you need to look at the degree you're going to get and figure out, is it worth getting the degree, right? What's the cost of that degree? So if you want to go out and get, I don't know, something like an art degree, that's fine, but it's not going to pay very well. For example, I also took classes in undergrad in geology, and I love geology, right? I love science. I think rocks are exciting. I'm reading books right now on volcanoes, for example, on the Hawaiian Islands, and it's all about geology, and I love it. But at the end of the day, I know geologists don't get paid very well. There's not a lot of jobs. A lot of times you have to go into academia, and I'd prefer to be someone who is in the field actually doing geological work. But at the end of the day, right, I start looking at the cost of going to undergrad at a variety of different schools, and I realize it's not worth it. So instead of doing geology, I thought, what do I enjoy doing? What am I currently doing? I'm working for a startup company, and because of that, I chose to go into finance. I did some research. I figured out, finance has a variety of different career paths. I could end up in corporate finance. I could end up in, investing or end up on Wall Street, right? Something exciting. And so I figured out there's different options. They pay fairly well. So this would be a good investment. The university I chose to go to was an in-state university. So in-state universities are cheaper. So I paid less money to go in-state to get my degree versus going out of state. On top of that, right, for business at least, it's more beneficial a lot of times to go to a top 10 school, but then you need to think about, do you need a graduate degree? If you need a graduate degree, it might be better to get a average school that's cheaper and then get that degree and then go and apply for better programs. So for example, I went to Washington State University, which was a fun, exciting state school, not the best ranked. And then I went to the University of Michigan, which is very highly ranked. And ended up paying a lot of money for my master's, but at the end of the day, I saved a bunch of money on my undergrad. So things to consider as well on top of this in-state versus out-of-state is also, where do you go in-state? I had the option, I could have gone to University of Washington, for example, instead of WSU. UW was in a big city in Seattle. The cost of living to live in Seattle is extremely expensive. I didn't like the fact that the school was not really a university. It's kind of like baked into the city. It has its own area, right? It's still a university. You just don't get the same feel though. When I went to Washington State University, which is a isolated college town in the middle of a wheat field, everything at that university is catered towards the students, because literally like 80-90% of everyone that lives in Pullman, Washington is a student or a professor. So you get a lot of different services, you get different feels, you can focus on your education. So that's more or less how to pick a degree. You need to think about what's going to pay, what's not going to pay, what do I enjoy doing, what do I don't enjoy doing. I think you need to weigh the balance on finding something that's exciting and that you'll stick with and you'll do for the long run and you do well in, but also look at how much it's going to pay you. So stepping back now about college here, maybe college isn't for you. That doesn't mean you need to go to college because everybody else is going to college. You go to a trade school. I have a lot of friends that work in HVAC, electricians, mechanics, all kinds of things, right? YouTubers, for example, that don't have degrees. You don't necessarily need the degree. An art degree is another example. You might be able to be a better artist and not get a degree and save a bunch of money from college, and promote your art through social media and doing different types of essentially free or nearly cheap solutions to promoting your art and becoming a better artist, going to Art Fest, doing self-education. There are other ways around college, and a lot of times you don't need a degree for college, and so spending a bunch of money just to say you have a degree might not actually pay out in the long run. So look at this from an investment standpoint. All right, so now the second piece here is, how do you finance this? So I didn't really have a lot of options for financing. I didn't have, rich parents who were paying for my school. And so for undergraduate, for example, I was lucky in the fact that I worked anywhere between 20 and 80 hours per week. So I could cover the cost of my apartment, my food, some of my tuition, and then I also got financial aid because I was married at the age of 20, so I was independent from my parents. So I got funding on that end. So I graduated undergraduate, my wife and I, with no debt. Now going into graduate school, there aren't really a lot of funding sources available in the sense of like free or like scholarship based funding. So I ended up having to take student loans on. So give you an example here, University of Michigan is extremely expensive. I believe it's the most expensive public school in the country, in the United States. I paid around like 21,000 a semester. My wife was paying 20 to 21,000 a semester. And you have two masters going at the same time. I had a boot camp on top of that. So I believe my wife's master's was about $63,000. Mine totaled out at around $70,000. So you add all that up, right? And you end up with something around like, I don't know, 130 something thousand-ish, right? So then I mentioned I have 160,000 in debt. Where's the other 30,000? Well, I had to pay for rent. I had to pay for food. I was no longer working at the startup company that I was working at before. I was spending all of my time deeply focused on my master's. I didn't have time to work. And so I ended up having to take out student loans. So now you have multiple options, which I should mention here. So you can take government loans and you can take private loans. Private loans usually have lower interest rates if you have great credit. However, they want someone usually with a deep credit history or someone like your parents or someone else that's highly responsible with a deep credit history to sign on for loans. I applied for loans on the private side as well. I was not granted any because I was too risky, as they put it. So I ended up having to go through the government loans. So government loans, though, yes, the interest rate is high. Yes, people are going to complain and whatnot for U.S. citizens. But at the same time, right, you can't default on a government loan, which is pros and cons, because at the same time, the government will actually adjust the terms and conditions of your student loans to make it better for you. So when I graduated, I was unemployed. I had no job. So I still had to make payments, but I didn't have a job. And luckily, I had some savings. So you need to figure out how you're going to make those. But they can make an adjustment and extend the terms of your loan, make adjustments so your monthly payments are smaller. But remember, if you extend the term of the loan here, you're going to end up paying more in the long run than if you were to actually just stick with the tenure. So my advice here, if you don't have a job or you have a job and you're making tiny amounts of money here, if you can get the financial extensions, do it. But have the intent that you're going to pay what you can today. And as your salary increases, right, then pay as much as you can. Try to pay extra, try to pay more, because you want to really knock off as much principal up front so you don't end up paying as much interest in the end. So the longer the loan goes, the more interest you pay. The shorter you pay it, the less interest you pay. So simple loan principle here. Okay, so now let's dive into how do you pay these off, right? So you have a job, you're making some money. I'm not going to say if you're making a lot or a little or whatever. There's really two kind of trains of thought on how you pay these off. The first one I'm going to throw out here is what I call the Dave Ramsey plan. So if you know Dave Ramsey, you can go and read all his materials. He has, I think it's called like the snowball effect or the snowball plan or something. Basically, he states what you do is you pay a little bit extra on your smallest loan. So say you have, I don't know, 4 different loans for student income. Let's say they're $10, $20, $30, and $40,000 for simplicity here. He says you'd pay off the one that's $10,000 first, and then as soon as that one gets paid off, then you roll the extra payment into the second loan, you pay off that one even quicker, and you roll it to the third one, and you roll it to the fourth one, and you pay it off the quickest, okay? That's how the plan works. You just look at the balances. That's fine, and that works from a psychological perspective. So a lot of people can't manage money very well. It's daunting to have all this student debt hanging over you, or debt in general. And so his plan is essentially a psychological approach where if you pay off the smallest loan first, you'll get success sooner. You'll feel like you really accomplished something and you have extra cash flow. So that's an advantage of this methodology, is you have more liquidity, more cash flow, right? If you can pay off that first loan quickly, because now you have less overall payments you have to make. So the downfall in this plan, though, is the fact that you don't consider interest rates, which leads me to the second methodology here, which is what I did. I just looked at all of my loans. I ran all the calculations to figure out what's the cheapest way for me to pay off these loans, not which way is going to make me feel the best or make me stick with a payment plan, because I was do or die going to pay them off as soon as possible, regardless of how I felt. So what I ended up doing was looking at it and doing the calculations. Essentially, you should be paying off the loan with the highest interest rate. So a lot of times for me, I had, can't remember all the types of the names of the loans, but you have essentially like a standard loan through graduate school, and then you have other loans called Grad Plus loans. Grad Plus loans are that additional money you need for living above and beyond your actual tuition. Or in general, just extra money that you need. Maybe your actual loans that you take, so I think it's like 10,000, 10,250, 10,500, something like that. That's the max you can take on the first type of loan with a lower interest rate. And then Grad Plus allows you to take additional loans, but it's at a higher rate. So for me, the biggest loans I had were these Grad Plus loans. So biggest loans, highest interest rate. I paid them off first, and I just worked my way down through both my loans and my wife's loans based on interest rates. So we both had Grad Plus and all that. I kind of blended the two approaches when I did it, and I paid off the loans that were the smallest loans with the highest interest rate. So if I had like say 3 Grad Plus loans and one was like 5,000, one was 10,000, one was 15,000, I paid off the 5,000 one first. So create some extra cash flow, right? Extra, I guess, money in your pocket that you're not obligated to pay monthly, and then worked my way through all those. So now that those are the two methodologies you can kind of choose, right? There's no really shortcut around it. There's no way to get rid of all these loans. You just got to work through it and grind and pay. The other main point here is that you need to live within your means, okay? So this is where I took advantages. If you look online, you'll find guys that are like, oh, I paid off my student loans in a year, and I paid off $100,000, and I did this, and I did that. Most of the time, it's because they're making a ton of money, right? They came out getting a job making $100,000, so it's not that hard to pay these loans off quickly. At the same time that you start looking at, they lived super, super frugally. They didn't do anything. They didn't go out. They didn't go on vacations. They didn't do all that. I'm somewhat an advocate of this in the sense that you need to get rid of the student loans because it's a massive burden on many people, especially when you're looking at $100,000 or more. So my wife and I, for example, we live frugally in general. So I didn't go on vacations unless it was something to go visit like a family member, a birthday, or like a funeral or something. Or we went for Christmas that year, but we only traveled usually once a year, and I went to see family. I got married, I went on a honeymoon, so I went to Hawaii. It was 10 years until I was able to go on my next actual vacation because I didn't want to waste money on going on these great vacations and having all this fun, and at the end of the day, I needed to pay off these student loans. Now, that being said, I'm not going crazy here, okay? You don't need to cut back so crazy, like I'm not going to drink any coffee, I'm not going to go out to dinner, I'm not going to for me, that's just a little unreasonable, right? It's nice to have a little bit of some luxuries in your life, a little bit of some freedoms, reward yourself here and there. But at the same time, you shouldn't be going out on these awesome vacations. Say you're going to China or Japan or Thailand, you're just traveling the world. And you're only going to go on one a year, right? That's just a little too crazy. You're just wasting money now. You really need to buckle down and focus on the loans if you want to get them done early, okay? And that leads me to my final point here. So something to consider that I've thought about a lot. Money is worth more than debt. So what do I mean by this? If you, for example, let's say you have $120,000 in debt and you have $20,000 in cash, you can buy a home usually. Maybe a small home, or let's say you can buy a car, an average car, right? Because you have cash you can put for a down payment. If you have a medical emergency and you have to make a payment, you have $20,000 in savings you can use for savings, right? Now let's take almost the same person here, but instead of $20,000 in cash and $120,000 in debt, meaning their net value at that point is $100,000. Let's say they have $100,000 in debt and zero cash. You're screwed, right? You can't buy anything, so you have no cash to put down, so nobody's going to make you a loan. So you're kind of in a tough spot. So for me, managing my personal finances throughout the entire process and the way I do everything is I track all of my spending for the month. I look at all the categories, and I try to figure out where I can cut money as much as possible. I always try to save as much as possible. And the way I do this is I would take my extra money for the month and I would split it in half, and I'd put half of it in savings in a high yield savings account, and I put the other half on my student loans. Okay, so I'm always paying this extra principal payment that I can. It could be, $10, $100, $1,000, right? Doesn't matter. You put the half of your extra into your loans, the debt you're paying off. You put the other half in savings because you need this cash and capital to kind of work your way around the system, have a rainy day fund, pay medical expenses, for example. Things pop up, you need a new car, something like that. Have cash, but also pay off the debts. Just do it split 50-50. That was the simplest way for me. It worked out well because I ended up essentially rolling up through this and doing similar to that snowball effect like I mentioned, where I paid off one loan and then I'd have extra capital now. So now I'd split that in half. So now say I paid off a loan that was an extra $200 a month. Now $100 extra would go into savings and $100 extra would go to the student loans. And now I'm in a position where I have this big lump of cash and savings and I have all my student loans paid off, but now I have a mortgage, right? So I need to start working on that. So that's kind of the strategy here for me, is keeping liquidity. Something I didn't do, which I wish I would have done. I'm really good with managing money. I don't overspend, as I've mentioned. I don't go on crazy vacations or anything like that. But I was always told never to get a credit card because it's horrible, it's bad, right? You don't need credit, and like this whole nonsensical view that a lot of personal finance people explain. You do need credit. Having access to credit is extremely important, again, on the liquidity side, also on the benefit side. So I'm not going to promote any cards here, but you can look at all the different cards out there and the rewards they give. You pay the same amount whether you pay with a credit card or a debit card. And if you pay off your credit card every month, and I pay mine off weekly, right? I treat it just like a debit card. It's no different than a debit card except for it pays you benefits. Okay, so it makes no sense not to use the credit card as long as you pay it off on time and even in advance, so you never accrue interest. So that's important. And again, if you're saving that cash and that savings that you have, you can use it to pay off that credit card every month and not have a balance. But doing that builds credit. Building credit means you can do other things. So if you need a car loan or you need a house loan or something like a mortgage, right, you're going to get a discount on that rate. Whereas if you didn't build credit, right, so say you go get a mortgage, you might get a 6% mortgage because you're super risky with no credit and you spend all of your money trying to pay off your student loans, but you don't have any cash and you don't have any credit. So you're not in a good position. Having a little bit of cash and having good credit is going to take you a lot further in the fact that now that mortgage, instead of 6%, you might get 5% or 4.5% or something. And so it seems like, well, that's just a little bit. It doesn't make a difference. It makes a huge difference over the life of a mortgage, which is, $100,000, $200,000 for a mortgage here for a house. So building credit and keeping liquidity, so having that cash on hand, I think is super, super important. People are going to ask also about investing. Yes, I mean, when I was younger in college and stuff, I had a little bit of extra capital here and there. I'd put like $100 into the stock market once every 6 months, 7 months, and like that. Wasn't a lot. I'd put a little here, a little there. Just diversify. Don't do anything stupid and go out there and think you're going to game the system. But again, that's how I've managed my financials. Nothing complicated. Just looking at your liquidity risk, so having cash on hand to pay things immediately, building credit, and then also picking the right degree in the right school so you're not wasting a bunch of time and money. So anyways, those are my tips and tricks on how I have financially gotten rid of all of my student loans. That's how I'm in the position I'm in. Have a good job, picked a good degree, made a good investment, paid things down, didn't spend a lot of money, utilized my credit and my liquidity, that extra cash I had on the side, and built everything up. So I'm in a comfortable position. I think financial independence is important for everybody, regardless if you're in quantitative finance or traditional finance or geology or art or English or anything else. So anyways, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And as always, until next time.